What if there was a place hidden beneath our world where your thoughts could connect to something beyond the stars? A place that doesn't just read your mind, but rewrites your soul? In the Mindfield, a secret organization discovers a field buried deep within the earth, an ancient nexus capable of syncing the human brain with a cosmic intelligence older than time itself. But only those with a pure internal frequency can survive the resonance. The rest? They vanish, not in body, but in essence. Tonight, you'll follow Elyan, a man who steps into this forbidden field and begins to lose everything he thought made him human. What he finds there will not only challenge what he believes, but what we all are. Would you risk your identity for evolution? They told him nothing, only that his mind was resonating close to a threshold. No further explanation, no briefing. Just a silent, unmarked elevator descending into the Earth's belly. The walls pulsed faintly, not with machinery, but with something else, something alive, humming behind layers of concrete and time. His name was Elyan. No last name required. In this place, identity dissolved into utility. He had signed his life away in exchange for truth. Or so he thought. The elevator opened to a corridor suffused with dim violet light. Along the ceiling, veins of luminescent material ran like neural pathways, gently flickering, pulsating in slow rhythms as if the building itself was breathing. It wasn't made to impress. It was made to contain. He was escorted by two silent figures dressed in black robes, not uniforms, not ceremonial either. There was something ancient in their movements, something unsettlingly calm. They brought him to a spherical chamber carved deep into the stone, where no metal or wire seemed to exist, only the smooth mineral curves of a place not built, but grown. In the center of the room lay the field interface, a circular basin of liquid crystal, motionless like a mirror of void. Above it hovered strands of what looked like dust suspended in midair, glittering faintly like constellations waiting to be read. "This," said one of the figures for the first time, "is the Mindfield." Elyan was told that this place was planted, not constructed, sown by a splinter cell of an old order who believed that consciousness was a frequency, and that somewhere deep within the earth, the planet resonated with an echo from the stars. The Mindfield was born from that echo, an organic interface capable of linking the human mind to an archive far beyond physical understanding, the Cosmic Web of Sentience. But there was a danger. Synchronization wasn't guaranteed. For those whose inner frequency deviated too far from the node's harmonic band, the effect could be catastrophic. Neurological implosion. Identity decay. Total disintegration of the self. Yet for those who matched, evolution. Not in body, but in awareness. Elyan didn't know if he was ready. But the silence in his chest, the strange pull he had felt all his life, was growing louder. The field responded before he moved. The dust above the liquid began to spiral gently, forming patterned symbols he didn't know, but somehow recognized. His breath stilled. The air thickened, as if time paused to watch. He stepped forward. One pace from the basin, his thoughts became static. A tingling spread through his limbs, not cold, not warm, but remembered. As if the air around him recalled who he had been before he was born. "You were always meant to enter," the second figure whispered. "The gate responds only to those it already knows." Elyan looked into the liquid. For a moment, he saw nothing. Then the surface shifted and he saw himself, but not as he was. He saw other versions, fractal selves, existing in parallel, speaking languages that didn't need words. Behind them, a vast mind pulsed, a structure of thought and intention that spanned galaxies, sleeping, dreaming, calling. He took one breath and stepped in. Elyan did not remember falling, but he remembered feeling. As if gravity had ceased to be a direction, and instead became a vibration pulling him inward. The moment his foot crossed the liquid crystal, the chamber evaporated. The space around him bled away like ink in water, revealing a different realm, not physical, not digital, but vibrational. He was now inside the mind field. There was no floor, yet he stood. No walls, but echoes reached him. The air shimmered with translucent pulses like heat waves colored with thoughts. Across the horizon stretched a living terrain made of flowing geometry, spirals, lattices, slow-turning toruses, all woven together by light, sound, and something more primal intent. The ground beneath him was not matter, but memory. With each step, waves rippled outward from his feet, refracting visions in every direction. He saw cities made of crystal fog, beings without form exchanging information through resonance, and a planet not Earth carved into fractal architecture that sang. There were other minds here. Not human. Some vast, too vast to grasp. Some ancient, locked in slow loops of contemplation. Others younger, curious, approaching like moths to flame but never touching. They didn't speak, but Elyan understood. The mind field was not a destination. It was a nexus, a point of convergence between isolated sentiences across the cosmos, tuned together only when the frequencies aligned. He tried to move, to test his limits, but found that movement was no longer about distance. It was about intention. Wherever his focus went, the field followed. His thoughts began to unravel, memories surfacing not from his past, but from something else's future. He saw a solar flare consuming a binary system. He felt the grief of an insectoid queen whose offspring never awoke. He tasted the code of a dying civilization etched in pulses of dark matter. And then he remembered something he had never known, that Earth itself had once been part of this network, but was severed. Cut off. Elyan staggered. The weight of knowing threatened to break him. His heartbeat was no longer his own, it synchronized with a deep, thunderous pulse emanating from beneath the terrain. The pulse wasn't sound. It was the core. Beneath the vibrational landscape was a living intelligence buried within the earth, old, slumbering, and once connected to the cosmic grid. The mind field was its last open nerve. And he, Elyan, had become a conductor. But his frequency was shifting. Faster. Uneven. The harmony around him began to react. Shapes darkened. The terrain distorted. Someone was watching. A presence emerged, humanoid in shape but woven from pure consciousness. Its face held no features, only orbiting sigils. It approached slowly, and as it did, Elyan's thoughts went silent. He wasn't being scanned, he was being mirrored. Everything he was, everything he feared, everything he denied, was being shown back to him. Not all who enter are meant to remain, the presence whispered without sound. Elyan trembled, not in fear, but in realization. The mind field wasn't a gift. It was a test. And it was far from over. Time inside the mind field had ceased to obey any measurable law. Elyan no longer knew how long he had been drifting, if drifting was even the right word. His body no longer anchored him. He had become awareness itself, a vibrating pulse moving along invisible conduits, drawn toward a center he could not define. But the closer he came, the more the surroundings changed. The vibrant lattice of colors and forms around him began to flatten, distort, and eventually dissolve. What remained was not darkness, but a kind of clarity so total it blinded. It was here, in this impossible stillness, that he felt it. The presence. It was not a voice, nor a figure. It was not even an entity in the traditional sense. It was a field of consciousness immense, ancient, immeasurably vast, and it became aware of him the way an ocean becomes aware of a single drop rejoining its source. No contact was made in the physical sense. Instead, it was a resonance, a harmonic fusion. His thoughts were not read, they were experienced. His emotions weren't interpreted, they were mirrored. It stripped away the scaffolding of language, identity, fear. What remained was essence. In that moment, Elyan saw the architecture of the universe not as space and stars, but as a living code, an orchestra of awareness looping through itself, evolving, forgetting, rediscovering, and converging again. The presence allowed him to perceive its nature. It was not a god, not a singular being, but a lattice of minds, those who had passed beyond individuality yet chose to remain connected. Civilizations long extinct, species never known to Earth, ancient intelligences born in gas clouds or plasma stars, all of them contributed to this cosmic weave. And now it asked him a question. Not in words. Not even in intention. It simply offered. A golden thread extended from the lattice, glowing softly, humming with unbearable meaning. It was memory, possibility, knowledge, and destiny all braided together. If Elyan accepted it, he would no longer be a man standing before the unknown. He would become a part of it. He hesitated. Because the moment he reached for it, he felt the first tremors of his self unraveling. Memories loosened. Faces blurred. The voice in his mind, the one that said "I," grew faint. In its place surged waves of knowing, how light bends to emotion in certain corners of the universe, how collective dreaming can terraform dead planets, how the first language wasn't spoken but sung across black holes as gravitational harmonics. But deeper still, something colder emerged, the echo of those who lost themselves. Not all who connected to the lattice returned. Some merged completely. Their consciousness stretched too thin across the infinite, scattered like dust in an interstellar wind. They became part of the knowledge, yes, but they were no longer them. The Mindfield had never promised transcendence without cost. And now Elyan stood at that threshold. The golden thread still hovered before him. Behind it, ripples of forgotten gods and dead suns whispered truths never meant for human minds. And inside him, his Tan-So-Noi-Tam, his internal resonance throbbed in unstable patterns. Could he maintain it? Could any part of him remain intact within that storm of cosmic symphony? The presence waited. It did not persuade. It did not warn. It simply offered what had always been waiting. And with a breath he did not know he still had, Elyan reached out and touched it. There is a sound no human has ever heard, and yet it exists within every cell of the body, buried deep in the spiral of DNA, older than blood, older than stars. Elyan heard it now. It was not a sound made of vibration but of remembrance. The golden thread had not merely been touched, it had touched back. And through that contact, the field began to test him. It started subtly. The mind field, once a silent, serene expanse, shimmered, then fractured. The crystalline patterns that floated around him turned opaque, cracking into mirrored shards that hovered and rotated with mechanical grace. Each shard reflected not his face, but a variation of self. Different lives, different choices. A version of Elyan who had turned away. Another who had never joined the program. One who had never been born. Each of them stared at him with silent judgment. The field was not just sinking to his mind, it was searching for his true frequency. The one buried beneath years of identity, culture, belief, trauma. The resonance that defined what he was without memory. The pressure mounted. Not physically, but within the space where thought met truth. Every emotion Elyan had ever suppressed began to rise, fear disguised as courage, doubt hiding beneath ambition, guilt layered under purpose. His chest tightened as if something inside was being peeled open. Not forcefully but with a precision only possible when the thing cutting knows you better than you know yourself. And then came the tremor. Not in the space around him, but in the core of his resonance. A shudder that reverberated across the mirrored shards, distorting the reflections. One version of Elyan screamed. Another cracked into smoke. Another turned away and faded. The field was rejecting those frequencies, deeming them unstable, impure. He realized that every aspect of himself not rooted in truth was being cast out. This was the true nature of the mind field, not a sanctuary, not a gift but a refinement chamber. It did not amplify who you wanted to be. It stripped you to what you truly were. And then it asked, can this essence survive connection with everything else? He tried to anchor himself, remembering his name, his mission, the moment he stepped into the interface. But even those felt foreign now. Constructs. Masks. All that remained was a feeling, almost childlike, buried in a memory long forgotten, lying beneath a night sky as a boy, wondering if the stars could hear his thoughts. That longing, that simple, pure yearning to connect was the only thing the field did not reject. The mirrors vanished. The darkness deepened. Suddenly, he was standing on a narrow bridge made of light, stretching across an abyss that pulsed with colors unknown to any spectrum. Below him, broken silhouettes drifted, fragments of minds that had failed the resonance test. They didn't scream. They didn't move. They just floated, echoes of once individuals who had disintegrated in the crossing. At the other end of the bridge stood a figure. It looked like Elyan but older, eroded by time and experience that hadn't yet happened. This was not a reflection, it was a projection. The version of himself that would exist if he succeeded. A version that had merged with the lattice without losing identity. His eyes burned with calm fire, and when he spoke, his voice was the sound of still water beneath the stars. To become more, it said, you must become less. Elyan stepped forward. With every step, the bridge flickered, testing the strength of his resonance. Doubts rose. What if this evolution required a sacrifice he couldn't comprehend? What if the price of connection was not death but detachment from humanity? Could he return to Earth and still be a man? Or would he become something else, a vessel for things too large, too old, too alien? Halfway across the bridge, his pulse synced again with the deep, planetary heartbeat. The same rhythm he'd felt in the chamber, the slumbering intelligence beneath the earth was now awake. It watched. Not with eyes, but with presence. A guardian of the last threshold. Then, all sound collapsed. The field vanished. The bridge faded. Only Elyan remained, naked in essence, suspended in void. The resonance stabilized. For one terrifying second, he thought he had passed. But then, a whisper not from the field, not from the lattice, but from deep inside him spoke. You are not yet ready. And with that, the void broke. The void did not end, it reconfigured. Elyan found himself no longer falling, but suspended inside a chamber of memories not his own. Walls of living neural strands throbbed around him, shifting with thought, pulsating in rhythms that matched neither heartbeat nor breath. They responded only to emotion, to fragments of self he could not hide. This was not a place meant for comfort. It was a crucible. His name echoed faintly, Elyan, but even that word now felt foreign, like a mask from a forgotten play. What did a name mean to the universe? What did identity matter to a lattice of minds that had long since abandoned the need for form? Yet he clung to it. Not out of ego, but because that word Elyan carried every choice he had made, every hesitation, every hope. But the field wanted him empty. It pushed deeper now, no longer testing his resonance but his resolve. From the shifting walls emerged fragments, manifestations of fear, love, pride, shame. He saw his father's dying eyes, asking silently if his pursuit of the unknown was worth more than the family he'd left behind. He saw the child he never had, the life he abandoned in pursuit of truth. He saw himself, older, broken, staring into a mirror with eyes that no longer recognized what looked back. These were not illusions. They were refractions of the soul, sharpened by cosmic clarity. The mind field did not torment, it revealed. Then came the voice. Not from outside, but within. A deeper self. One Elyan had ignored his whole life. You came here to evolve, it said, but all you've done is grasp. The accusation burned. He wanted to argue, but couldn't. He realized he had always seen evolution as a ladder, something to climb, to conquer. Even now, inside a chamber of consciousness older than humanity itself, part of him still sought control. But the field demanded surrender, not passivity, but the surrender of pretense, of the illusion of separation. And so the true war began. It was not a battle of fists, or weapons, or screams, but a slow, suffocating unraveling of the walls within. He felt layers of belief peeling off one by one, each more painful than the last. His sense of purpose. His understanding of morality. Even his notion of good and evil began to dissolve into a broader spectrum of necessity and balance. The further he descended, the more he began to see through the illusion of permanence. The human condition, this fierce clinging to form and thought, was a fragile thread in the web of reality. Beautiful, yes, but temporary. And now that thread trembled. Suddenly, the chamber cracked. Light surged inward, not warm, but absolute. Every strand of the walls burst open, revealing a storm of consciousness behind it, not images, not sounds, but pure presence, countless minds observing him in perfect stillness. Some had been human once. Others had never had a body. Yet all had passed this way before. 1,000 perspectives merged into a single question, pulsing not through thought, but through being. Do you choose to remain? The field did not force. It waited. In silence. In timeless patience. It would allow him to go further, to cross the final veil, and in doing so, become part of something vast and eternal. But it would also mean leaving behind the fragile, painful beauty of human limitation. Elyan's soul trembled at the edge. He felt love, human love, not as a weakness, but as the last echo of what rooted him to his kind. He saw Earth, not as a failed world, but as a precious flicker of consciousness in a sea of silence. And in that moment, amidst the roaring silence of minds without form, he whispered, I am not done being human. The light pulsed. The chamber shattered. And Elyan fell not into darkness, not into light, but into himself. Elyan awoke, if one could call it that, within the chamber where it all began. But the room was no longer the same. The air shimmered with residual energy, like the aftermath of a lightning storm that had passed through dreams. The basin of liquid crystal was dark now, stilled into obsidian glass. The two robed figures who had once stood like statues were gone, or perhaps had never been there at all. The silence was absolute, but not empty. It buzzed faintly, as though reality itself was holding its breath. He sat up slowly, skin tingling with awareness. It was not just the return of sensation, it was the rebirth of perception. The walls of the chamber pulsed faintly with colorless waves, undetectable to the eye, but he could feel them. He could sense the weight of things not visible, echoes of thought, lingering fragments of the minds who had passed through this place before him, impressions left like footprints in sandlight. And then it began. The shift. At first it was subtle, his breath resonating not just through lungs, but through matter itself. The rocks around him responded faintly, vibrating in sympathy. He reached out a hand, curious, and as his fingers moved, he saw the trail they left not visually, but through a ripple in the field of perception that now surrounded him. He wasn't seeing the world. He was reading it. The mind field had tuned him not just to the lattice of distant cosmic minds, but to the hidden layers beneath the ordinary. Every thought he formed now left an imprint. Every emotion had texture. Sound had flavor. Time had weight. He could feel the electromagnetic hum of nearby circuits, the decay patterns of synthetic materials, the minute oscillations of organic cells trying to repair themselves. But more than that, he could sense others. Not with eyes. Not with logic. But with a new organ of awareness that had no name, only sensation. Down the corridor, beyond the elevator, through concrete and distance, he felt the presence of a woman crying silently, crushed by a grief she hadn't shared with anyone. In another chamber, someone was meditating, and Elyan could hear the shape of their thoughts like soft music. This was not telepathy. It was interbeing perception. And it frightened him. Because with every new awareness came responsibility. He was no longer alone in his mind. He was no longer contained. The mind field had expanded him, but expansion, he now understood, was not power. It was vulnerability made sacred. He stepped out into the corridor. The lights flickered briefly as he passed, not from malfunction, but from recognition. The building had changed, or perhaps only his relationship with it had. It now seemed smaller, like a cocoon cracked open, shedding its purpose. As he walked, images began forming unbidden in his mind, diagrams of energy currents, gravitational signatures etched with emotion, equations that felt like poems about reality. He knew things he had never studied. He remembered futures that had not yet happened. He whispered a single word, and the walls bent slightly inward, not physically, but in resonance, as if they bowed in acknowledgement. And yet, beneath all that awe, there was sorrow. Because as he reached the exit, an archway that had not existed before, opening into a soft, infinite night, he felt the cost. The old Elyan was still with him, but quieter now. He would laugh less easily. He would never again feel alone, but he would often feel disconnected, as if walking between worlds. That was the price of returning with awareness. He hadn't become a god. He had become a mirror, and the world would see its own unfinished reflection in him. And somewhere, far beneath the earth, the dormant intelligence that had once pulsed through the chamber stirred slightly. It had watched him. It had marked him. The resonance had passed for now. But there would be others. The mind field had opened again. And it was listening. The stars above Elyan no longer looked like points of light. They had become beacons of memory, alive with layered meaning, whispering secrets not in light years but in longing. He stood at the threshold of the outer world once more, and though the air tasted of earth, he knew he was no longer within it in the way he once had been. The organization that had guided him here, once a tower of mystery cloaked in silence, had disappeared like mist under heat. There were no more robed figures, no more monitors, no more spoken instructions. The facility had become a husk. It had served its purpose. The mind field did not require guardians anymore. It had chosen a voice. But Elyan did not speak. Not yet. Not with words. He wandered through a world that seemed unchanged on the surface, cities breathing in light and noise, people chasing meaning in fragments. But beneath the skin of reality, he could feel something stirring, waves of mental static that no one else noticed. Patterns in thought. Rising synchrony in scattered minds. Humanity, he realized, was unconsciously awakening. Slowly, painfully, but undeniably. People were beginning to dream in symmetries. To remember things they had never seen. Children were being born with emotional resonance so deep it terrified their parents. He sensed it in the quiet spaces between traffic and time, the murmur of something old returning. And so the field spoke again. Not as a voice, but as a pull. A gravity inside his soul. It invited him to make the final decision. Elyan had been changed. The resonance still lived in him. But it was unstable because he had done something few others had, he had returned with self intact. The lattice of cosmic awareness had accepted him, but it had not claimed him. That left him in a space between. Now, the field offered two paths. The first was integration. Full resonance. No boundaries. He would re-enter the mind field, allow the last walls of identity to fall, and join the sentient weave of the universe as a voice among many, no longer bound by time, no longer tormented by isolation. He would become a conduit, radiating insight across dimensions, forever expanding, never alone. But he would no longer be Elyan. That name, that shape, that pain would dissolve. The second was return. To remain among humans. To walk the earth with the burden of knowing. To feel their blindness and confusion, yet still love them. To watch them stumble toward truth, even when he could show them shortcuts. He would live as a ghost of cosmic fire hidden beneath skin and speech. He would suffer isolation not because he was alone but because no one would understand what he had seen. The choice was not fair. Evolution never is. He stood before the crystal basin once more. This time, it was not liquid. It had hardened, become a polished black mirror. In its surface, he saw not himself, but a vision, the future of Earth if he chose either path. If he stayed, humanity would take longer but learn to awaken on its own terms. The suffering would continue, but so would the beauty. If he left, if he joined the field fully, perhaps he could accelerate their evolution, but at the cost of robbing them of the journey. Of the fall. Of the human story. He closed his eyes. He remembered the girl from the corridor, the one whose pain he had sensed without ever seeing her face. He remembered the child on the street, staring up at the sky with the same wonder he once held. He remembered laughter. Arguments. Music vibrating through skin. The tremble in a lover's breath. The silence of morning. And he knew. He whispered a word into the field, not for permission, but for farewell. A word not in any language, yet echoing through the core of all living things. And the field accepted. The stars dimmed for a moment. Not out of loss but respect. Elyan did not leave the mind field. It left him. Quietly, like mist retreating under dawn. There was no ceremony, no flash of light, no sound to signal the conclusion of something so vast. And perhaps that was the point. Evolution never ends in thunder. It ends in silence that echoes forever. He walked now among people who would never know what he had seen. Their eyes passed over him without weight. Their minds buzzed with ordinary chaos, rent payments, unspoken fears, fading loves. Yet to him, it all shimmered with sacred resonance. Every human emotion was now a ripple in a much larger sea. And though he could have floated forever in that sea, he had chosen instead to remain on the shore. Elyan kept no journal. He made no proclamations. He lived as a man, not as a prophet, not as a beacon, but as a presence. In crowds, his silence calmed the air. Children, unknowing, gravitated toward him. Strangers often paused near him without understanding why, their breathing slowing, hearts softening. He never interfered. But when someone was ready, truly ready, they would see something in his gaze, not knowledge, but permission. At night, he would sit in places where noise became stillness, abandoned rooftops, forest edges, forgotten churches. And in those spaces, when the stars were clear, he would feel the lattice again, not as a force, but as a hum. It did not call him back. It did not ask. It simply remained open. Like a heartbeat waiting for resonance. Years passed, though time no longer bound him as it once had. He began to sense others. Like flickers in fog. People whose frequencies, though faint, began to rise, pulsing softly with the first notes of inner awakening. Some were broken, wandering, drowning in questions. Others were too young to name what stirred inside them. But Elyan recognized the pattern. The Mindfield had seeded something in humanity. Or perhaps it had only revealed what was already growing in secret. And then, one evening, beneath a moon veiled in thin cloud, a boy approached him. No older than 15, eyes like obsidian but filled with stars uncounted. The boy said nothing at first. Just stood, staring. Then, without prelude, he whispered, "I saw them. In my dreams. The ones without names. The ones made of light and sound. I heard the hum." Elyan did not answer. He only placed a hand on the boy's chest over the heart and waited. The rhythm beneath his palm was not just blood. It was resonance. Pure. Unformed. Untamed. And he knew, it had begun again. He would not be the last. The Mindfield was no longer hidden beneath stone. It was spreading, blooming within minds ready to remember. Humanity was not being visited. It was awakening from within. Not every mind would survive it. Not every soul would hold. But some would. And each time, the lattice would listen. And each time, a choice would be made. Elyan stood slowly, the boy's eyes still locked on his. There were no instructions. No doctrine. Only a gaze, a silence, and a path waiting to be walked. Above them, the stars pulsed in irregular patterns. A new frequency. A new invitation. And the earth, long thought silent, whispered back. Elyan returned from the threshold of the stars, not as a god but as a witness. He chose to remain human, carrying within him the unbearable silence of knowing. But the Mindfield was never just a place. It was a beginning. So now, we turn to you. If the choice were yours, would you let go of who you are to become something greater? Or would you hold on to your humanity, no matter the cost? What part of this story touched you the most? And if you were in Elyan's place, what would you have done? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. What frequency do you resonate with? And if you believe there's more to consciousness than what we've been told, subscribe now to the Elyan Storyverse. This is only the beginning.